1969, members of an anti-establishment quasi-cult committed a series of shocking murders in the Los Angeles area at the guidance and direction of 34-year-old Charles Manson, an ex-con and sex trafficker with a mesmerizing ideology that attracted many young people in search of family and belonging. That search eventually led to a bloody crime spree that shocked Hollywood and the nation. Months later, the killers were apprehended, indicted by grand jury, and eventually tried for their crimes and sentenced. You would think that would be the end of the so-called Manson family, but that wasn't. In fact, every true crime case attracts not only the curious, the armchair detectives among us, but the sycophants, those who glom onto either the victims' families or to the perpetrators themselves in some misguided and delusional attraction to fame and infamy. Remarkably, the Manson family continued to draw new followers after they were indicted for murder, individuals who were more enamored with the idea of infamy than deterred by the grotesque reality of the family's actions. The late 1960s and early 70s were a time of deep social upheaval, and Manson's twisted charisma and message continued to attract those who felt alienated by society's conventions. To these followers, the Manson family represented a rebellion against mainstream norms, an anti-heroic rejection of a world they found hypocritical and meaningless. Those who joined after the indictments were a unique breed, drawn less by Manson's initial hippie ideals and more by the notoriety that surrounded him. They were captivated by the idea of belonging to something larger than themselves, even if it was dark and destructive. For some, the Manson family was an opportunity to be part of an historical moment, however infamous. Manson's perverse mystique offered a countercultural identity that fed into their own sense of disillusionment. The individuals who gravitated toward the family in 1970 and 1971 were often misfits, people already existing on society's fringes, searching for a purpose or place where they could be seen. They were willing to overlook the violent legacy of the family in exchange for a sense of belonging and the allure of being close to someone notorious. To them, the trials and convictions only added to Manson's mystique, as if they were pledging allegiance not just to a person, but to a legend, a delusion of shared power and radical defiance. In their eyes, the Manson family wasn't a cautionary tale, it was a warped badge of honor. Charles Manson's ideology, often regurgitated by loyal followers like Lynette Squeaky Fromme and Sandra Good, was a chaotic blend of anti-establishment rhetoric, environmentalism, racial paranoia, and apocalyptic prophecy. This strange brew of beliefs appealed to those who felt profoundly disconnected from mainstream society and were looking for a cause, no matter how delusional or destructive, that promised meaning and belonging. Manson's worldview was deeply anti-establishment, railing against government, societal norms, and traditional values. For individuals disillusioned by the counterculture's failures and the ongoing conflicts of the era, like the Vietnam War and civil rights struggles, Manson's rhetoric offered a radical alternative to the status quo. It validated their anger and frustration, casting Manson and his followers as warriors against a corrupt and hypocritical system. Manson's environmentalism, championed by Fromme and Good and others, held a particular sway over new recruits. They preached a back-to-nature ethos, rejecting modern technology and advocating for an ecologically pure lifestyle, which resonated with the growing environmental movement of the early 1970s. In a world becoming increasingly industrialized and alienating, Manson's call to return to simpler, earth-centered living gave these disaffected followers a sense of purpose and identity, positioning them as protectors of the planet against a destructive society. Manson's prophecy of an impending race war, which he dubbed Helter Skelter, was a paranoid fantasy that promised his followers a pivotal role in a world-altering event. This narrative played into the fears and anxieties of the era, particularly for those who felt powerless in a rapidly changing world. By framing his followers as the chosen ones who would survive societal collapse and emerge as leaders of a new order, Manson gave them a sense of power and destiny that was intoxicating and validating. Those who remained fiercely loyal even after Manson's imprisonment projected an image of martyrdom and defiance that appealed to those drawn to extreme expressions of loyalty. Their unwavering support, along with public displays of devotion, painted Manson as a misunderstood prophet rather than a criminal, drawing in those who thrived on the idea of being part of something persecuted but righteous. Manson's ideology, regurgitated and mythologized by his most ardent followers, offered a dark but compelling narrative for those craving meaning in a chaotic world. It was an ideology that promised belonging, rebellion, and a place in the annals of history, even if it also meant embracing madness. In this episode of What Became of the Manson Family, we're going to look at the Groupies, those who joined the family after the indictments, those who saw the fame and notoriety that the family received as they faced their murder trials and chose to join them. Our first new family member was one of the last members to join. She was discussed in the previous video in this series. Her name was Priscilla Kay Cooper, known as Tuffy, and she later got involved with the Aryan Brotherhood members affiliated with the family who wound up killing a married couple. So let's start with Priscilla. She was born on August 19, 1951 in Kern County, California, in the Bakersfield area. However, she was issued a Social Security number from the state of Missouri, indicating that the family may have lived in the heartland at some point in Priscilla's early life. By the mid-1960s, they were again living in California, where Priscilla briefly attended Wilcox High School in Santa Clara. Here is her 1965 yearbook picture when she was 14, and her photo the following year in 1966. We aren't sure about her family situation, the name of her father, or whether she had siblings. Her mother was named Olita Cooper, and she would later tell authorities that Priscilla was a troubled child who dropped out of high school early. When asked why Tuffy chose to leave school, Olita explained that every time she'd get into trouble, the school people would call police and they would haul her off to juvenile hall without telling us why. She also referred to her daughter as brilliant and explained Tuffy dropping out by saying, "She just lost interest. She couldn't face up to her juvenile record, and she was afraid because the school kids made fun of her." At the age of 19, Cooper gave birth to a son. The next year, in 1971, at the age of 20, she was working as a topless dancer. One article I read indicated that she fell in with motorcycle gang members associated with the Manson cult. By 1972, she had an X carved on her forehead, and her son was being raised by her father in San Jose. Not sure where Olita, Priscilla's mom, was at the time, however. Tuffy was dating James Craig, 10 years her senior, an ex-convict and Aryan Brotherhood member with a long criminal history. She got a tattoo on her arm of the name Spider, Craig's nickname. Tuffy was living with Nancy, Brenda, Pittman of the Manson family, Maria, Crystal, Alonzo, another late joinee to the family, and all three women were dating Aryan Brotherhood members, including 2 escapees from a work detention program. They lived in Stockton, California, where the men were on a robbery spree, along with a man named James Willett. Willett, a Marine Corps and Vietnam veteran, was originally from Kentucky. He and his wife Lauren had an 8-month-old infant daughter, Heidi. The group then relocated to a rented home in the Sonoma region, where they stayed for just a few months before returning to Stockton without James Willett. Turns out he was murdered by James Craig and the other 2 men, Michael Montfort and Billy Goucher. A month later, at a rented house in Stockton, and on the same day that a stranger found James' body half buried in the Gurneville forest, Lauren Willett was shot and killed by Michael Montfort. Montfort had used James Willett's ID on a recent robbery arrest, which triggered a skip trace for the bail issued. Police then located Willett's car at the new Stockton residence, showed up, and busted in to discover Nancy Pittman holding the baby of James and Lauren. It was 2 days later that they found Lauren's body buried under the house, and the 3 men were charged with murder. Priscilla Cooper spoke to investigators. She told them that Lauren was accidentally shot by Montfort with a pistol. However, police believe that Mrs. Willett was killed to silence her from going to police. After Pittman and Cooper were booked at Sonoma County Jail, they were later remanded back to Frontera to await their charges as accessories to Lauren's murder. Goucher, who was dating Maria Alonzo, we'll get to her later in this video, pled guilty to second-degree murder and agreed to testify against Craig and Montfort. They also wound up making plea deals at the start of their June 1973 trial. Nancy Pittman and Priscilla Cooper were brought to trial to testify against their men. Craig and Montfort tried to marry Tuffy and Brenda, but it was a failed effort. Goucher had already married Alonzo that spring. Nancy Pittman was sentenced to several years behind bars for her role in Lauren's murder, and so was Priscilla Cooper. In 1976, Priscilla was no longer into the family stuff, but still in a prison relationship with Craig, who was serving his sentence. That year, Tuffy was charged in San Bernardino Superior Court with possession of illegal drugs and a weapon while in a state prison. She was sentenced to another 6 months to 5 years. But she was out just a year or 2 later, and so was Craig. In July 1978, Priscilla approached a man named Gordon Gunter, a house builder and part-time pot dealer, asking if he could help Craig find work now that he was free. He agreed to hire the felon and introduced them, and another parolee, Edward Barabbas, to a man named Chester Lee Hunt. The 4 men, Hunt, Gunter, Craig, Barabbas, became drinking buddies, but Gunter was dismayed that the 2 jailbirds failed to show up to work, and instead went around robbing drug dealers across the Sacramento area. In the fall of 1978, Priscilla was living with Barabbas and his girlfriend. Cooper was pregnant and addicted to heroin. That November, her boyfriend's crimes caught up with him. He and Barabbas were found in the trunk of a stolen car in Sacramento, and the car was on fire. Both men had been shot and then hog-tied together before being forced into the trunk, and the car set aflame. Barabbas was dead by the time police and paramedics arrived. Craig was alive, but gravely wounded. He had been shot in the face, most of his jaw blown off, not to mention the burns. The only words he said that police could make out were, "She's dangerous. She's dangerous." We do not know if he was referring to Cooper. James was put into a medically induced coma and died a month later. Priscilla then gave birth to her second child, a daughter named Desiree. Desiree was born addicted to heroin. Priscilla went to work at a brothel to pay for diapers and smack. One night, the girlfriend of the late Edward Barabbas got kidnapped, robbed, and sexually assaulted by Chester Lee Hunt, one of the drinking buddies of her late boyfriend. She was babysitting baby Desiree at the time. Priscilla had taken off, grieving her boyfriend, and, needing a fix, she committed several armed robberies. She got caught and was sentenced to 7 years in prison, starting in 1980. Hunt, by the way, got shot and wounded by a police officer and was sentenced to life in prison. Priscilla's boss at the brothel recommended an older married couple to take the new baby, and Tuffy agreed. Desiree's older brother, then 8, was still with Cooper's father in San Jose. We don't know why the baby didn't go with family. By her own account, Desiree was treated well by the older couple, although with little in the way of structure or education. She'd see Priscilla, her mom, on and off after Cooper was again paroled, but her drug and criminal problems increased. The last time Desiree saw her birth mother was when she was just 8 years old. She later went to live in Southern California with the son of the older couple, who both passed away shortly thereafter. and she struggled her entire life with addiction until finding recovery at the age of 41. We don't know what became of her older brother. Priscilla Kay Cooper died in 2007 in Nevada of unknown causes. In the last episode, we discussed the events surrounding the 1971 Hawthorne robbery, an attempt on the part of members of the Manson family to steal weapons and money toward efforts to break Charlie out of prison after his conviction in the Tate LaBianca killings. The next post-arrest associate of the family was involved in that robbery and a couple other notable situations. Born February 27, 1939 in Arizona, Dennis Rice was a married father of 4, a self-described revolutionary at the time Manson was awaiting trial. Rice saw Charlie on the news in mid-1970, then visited him in jail, and was immediately swayed. He thought the Tate LaBianca murders were a first salvo of revolution in America.
The night of the murders, it was 5 o'clock in the morning when they brought the newspapers and set them up in racks along the sidewalk. And so I reached over and picked up a newspaper and read about all the horror that occurred the night before a seal was drive in Los Angeles. You know what I thought I saw? I thought I saw signs of revolution.
He left his wife and joined the family, taking on a leadership role while bringing his 4 young children to live with him at Spahn Ranch. That summer, ahead of her potential testimony in the Tate LaBianca murder trial, Barbara Hoyt was being pressured by her former friends in the Manson family not to talk to the prosecution. They also intimated threats against her folks if she did testify. Barbara, however, trusted one of her former friends, 17-year-old Ruth Ann Morehouse, a.k.a. Oish. So when Oish called Hoyt and offered her an all-expenses-paid trip to Hawaii if she skipped the trial, Barbara agreed. On September 5th, Ruth Ann and Barbara flew to Honolulu, where they checked into the penthouse suite of the Hilton Hawaiian Village Hotel in Honolulu. However, any hope of tropical pleasures quickly flew out the window, as Oish kept warning Barbara that the authorities might be looking for her. So the two just stayed in the suite. Every morning, however, Ruth Ann called someone back in Los Angeles, usually Squeaky Fromme. And then on the 9th, Ruth Ann became very serious after her morning call and said she had to immediately fly back to Los Angeles, that Barbara should stay in Hawaii but accompany her to the airport ahead of Oish's flight back to California. So the 2 young women traveled by cab to the airport, heading inside to a restaurant. Barbara was hungry and ordered a hamburger. When it arrived, Ruth Ann grabbed the burger, said she was going outside, and telling Hoyt to pay for the order. Barbara got the burger back and ate it as Oish prepared to board her flight. Just before she got on board, she turned to Hoyt and said, "Imagine what it would be like if that hamburger had 10 tabs of acid in it." And off she went. Barbara left the airport and headed into downtown Honolulu, where suddenly she began feeling very strange, very high. She threw up in a public bathroom and then staggered to a nearby Salvation Army building. There, she asked a man to call for help and was taken to the hospital. Apparently, the burger was dosed after all. But Barbara Hoyt, who remained in the hospital for a few days before returning to LAX, decided not to heed the warning issued. She called prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi and agreed to testify. And Bugliosi decided to go after the people involved with her drugging and prosecute them for witness tampering. One of them was Dennis Rice. Charlie was convicted of the Tate LaBianca murders in November 1970, as were his 3 co-defendants, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten. Charlie and Susan were also facing charges for the murder of Gary Hinman, which occurred less than 2 weeks before Sharon Tate and her friends were killed. And Charlie also had to pay the piper on charges related to the late August 1969 murder of Spawn Ranch hand Donald Shorty Shea. But he'd already been given a death sentence for the TLB murders, and that had the family scrambling to find a way to get Charlie, their father, out. A month after the convictions, Dennis Rice was indicted along with Squeaky, Catherine Gypsy Scher, Steve Clem Grogan, and Ruth Ann Morehouse for witness tampering. Rice, Grogan, and Scher all did their minimum time in jail. Gypsy was in jail for those charges on January 5th, 1971, when she gave birth to a baby boy named Phoenix. Ruth Ann, however, fled the state and went into hiding. When Dennis went to jail for the poisoning charges, he left his children with the family and didn't tell his soon-to-be ex-wife where they were. The family were used to having little kids around, and you can see Rice's children in the documentary Manson, including one of Dennis's kids being grossly groped by Steve Clem Grogan. In early 1972, the former Mrs. Rice called police to report the kids missing. She had assistance from detectives Whiteley and Gunther, who had investigated the Hinman murder. They tried reaching out to members of the family to find out where the Rice kids were, but nobody was talking. Finally, Kitty Ludesinger agreed to speak with the detectives and helped lead police to a ranch in Lancaster, California. There, police found Rice's kids in a cave beneath a chicken coop, along with another child. They'd been trained to run and hide if the po-po showed up. On August 21st, Como and Dennis Rice led Gypsy, Mary, Little Larry, and Chuck Lovett, another new associate, we'll talk about him in a few minutes, to the Western Surplus Store in Hawthorne, California. This was an Army-Navy retailer which stocked weapons of many calibers. There they held up staff and customers at gunpoint and gathered more than 140 rifles to be used, ostensibly, to break Manson out of prison. But someone tripped a silent alarm, bringing police to the scene. A shootout began, and when it was over, both Mary and Gypsy were wounded, and everyone was arrested, with the exception of 19-year-old Lovett, who managed to flee undetected. The robbers planned to steal the rifles, use them to break Manson out of jail, then hijack a plane to fly him out of the country. They also robbed a store in Covina a week earlier, making off with $2,600 in cash. Dennis served 5 years for his involvement in the shootout, as well as another 2 years for violating parole terms that he disassociated from the family. During those years, he became a born-again Christian and started a ministry behind bars. After his release from prison, Brother Rice, as he was known, became an ordained minister, remarried, and moved to the Southwest. He continued preaching, including in jails and prisons, about how God saved his wayward anarchist soul. Dennis died of liver cancer in 2013 in Bullhead City, Arizona. One of his sons has taken over his ministry. Jeannie Gentry, true name Jennifer Sue Leghorn, joined the family right after the TLB indictments. Born March 17, 1948 in San Francisco, her father George was in the military, and her mother Dorothy was born in South Africa, of British descent. The couple married in 1942 in Ireland during the war. Jeannie grew up in Berkeley with an older sister, Leslie, and at some point George and Dorothy split up. In 1963, Dorothy died, and Jeannie moved to Southern California, presumably with her father, where she attended Santa Monica High School. She was arrested in February 1970 in Independence, California, attempting to pass LSD to family member Bruce Davis in court during a hearing. Ginny was among those photographed by Life magazine for a pictorial about the family at Spahn Ranch. She was also filmed for the documentary by Robert Hendrickson, which was released in 1973. At the time that Dennis Rice's children were found up in Lancaster, Ginny was with the family at the time. Since then, she has married and had at least one child. In 1990, during an airing of CNN's Larry King Live, with substitute host Maureen Reagan, eldest daughter of the former late president, interviewing ex-family member Paul Watkins, Ginny called in to the broadcast.
And we have a caller on the line who will not say where she's calling from, but you were a member of the Manson family?
I joined, I wouldn't say joined, I arrived about 6 months after the murders.
You arrived about 6 months, Jenny, you arrived 6 months after the murders. Paul, you left how long before the murders?
A couple of months.
Now,
I remember Jenny.
Jenny, have we got the caller still on the line?
Yes.
Yeah. Jenny, what happened when where did you join up with the Manson family?
I met Sandy and Squeak at Christmas in Lone Pine, and without knowing who they were, they offered to put me up for the night. I was just hitchhiking through, and later found out who they were, and I was amazed that I was still alive, and amazed that they would take in a stranger at the same time, because people were out to kill them after what was going on as well.
How long were you with them?
On and off for a year.
For a year. And Paul, you remember her from this time?
Yes. I'm wondering if Jenny has gotten any therapy. Jenny, I'd like to ask you, are you better? Is that aching, empty hole inside that makes you go out and follow guys like Charlie?
I'm married now. I have a family. I'm well established. I have fond memories of some of the things, but you can't go back to something. You know, you couldn't go back even when you were there to something before.
Well, would you want to, Jenny?
I like knowing that people are doing well. I like knowing Paul's doing well and moving on.
Yeah.
You know, I don't step on toes.
Well, Jenny, was there anything going on when you were there that was more antisocial behavior than perhaps normal antisocial behavior of the day?
You know, it was hippiedom. There was free sex, you know, but it was combined within a group.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed that lifestyle at the time.
Okay. Well, Jenny, we wish you a lot of luck.
Thank you, and I wish you
Good
all
luck.
a lot of luck, too. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Today, Jennifer lives in the Southwest. Now let's move on to the other post-arrest affiliate who participated in the Hawthorne robbery. Charles Allen Lovett, a.k.a. Chuckleberry, was born January 3, 1952. I was unable to find his birth or family information, but one comment on a Manson site indicated that he might have originally had the surname Brown. So a Charles Brown is, well, a needle in a haystack. Lovett attended Birmingham High School in Van Nuys, California. When the family was arrested, he saw them on television and decided to head to Spahn Ranch. An alleged former high school girlfriend of his claimed that he was ditching school to go to Chatsworth and hang out with the family, and he broke up with her after popping her cherry there at the ranch one day. He appeared with the family at Spahn's in the pages of Life magazine, a staged shoot in and around the infamous Wave Cave. Lovett was also among those featured in the film Manson, the tall, good-looking kid with straight dark hair. Lovett seems to have been a pretty die-hard believer in the Manson philosophy, even going so far as to carve not an X, but a full-on swastika on his forehead. And yet Charlie himself, allegedly, when a photo of Chuckleberry was pointed out to him, said, "I have no idea who that is." Lovett was among those who committed armed robbery in Hawthorne in August 1971, along with Dennis Rice, Kenneth Como, Lawrence Giddings, Mary Brunner, and Catherine Gypsy Scher. He managed to escape from police following the shootout and remained at large for several weeks before his eventual capture. He was the first to be tried for the Hawthorne incident and received a sentence of 10 years to be served at the California Correctional Institution in Tehachapi. In prison, he trained as a tattoo artist. He got out in 1976 on early release and has stayed out of trouble. He continued working as a tattooist, was known as a gifted artist and muralist, and moved north to the Sierra Nevadas, west of Reno. He married, had 2 children, including a son who died in the early 90s of leukemia. Now divorced, Chuckleberry likes to smoke pot and hang out with his German Shepherd. When covering the Manson family, one constantly teeters between the notion of transparency and discretion. What should be shared? How much does the public deserve to know? And even when they deserve to know, can sharing that information potentially harm the subject? Because my personal goal is to demystify the family, to encourage an air of open communication so that former family members feel it is safe to tell us their truths, I try to err on the side of discretion. I hope to share information about those former members so as to not invade their privacy or their security. I haven't always succeeded, but I continue to try. This became a particularly relevant struggle when it came to coverage of the next former associate of the family, Maria Alonzo, aka Crystal. For many years, people believed she was deceased, myself included, a heroin overdose in the 1980s in Riverside, California. But a few years ago, I got a message from one of my researchers letting me know that Crystal, also known as Crystal Palace, was in fact very much alive. The woman who died in Riverside was a different Maria Alonzo. As you see from this thread, we both decided it was in the best interest of this individual to let the public continue to think she was deceased. Why is that? Well, you're going to learn several things about her life, and perhaps you'll understand why we felt that discretion overruled transparency. Of course, a certain grumpy old man decided to reveal that I had falsely reported her as dead. But since the truth is now out there, I'll tell you what I know about Maria, including how she is today. Maria Teresa Alonzo was born May 19, 1951 in New York. Her father, Leo, was born in Spain, and her mother, Dorothy, was a native New Yorker. Presumably, Maria had siblings, however, I was unable to find verification. The Alonzo family moved to the Los Angeles area, where Maria attended Hollywood High School. At the age of 18, Alonzo headed back to New York, to Socrates and the August 1969 Woodstock Festival, right about the time the Manson family was committing the Tate LaBianca murders. Before year-end, Maria was back in California, working in Hollywood as a stripper. She met Susan Atkins at Sybil Brand, the women's jail in Los Angeles, sometime in late 1970 or very early 1971, who told her all about Jesus Christ, aka Charles Manson. It was Susan who nicknamed Alonzo Crystal, or Crystal Palace. We do not know what charges Alonzo was facing that landed her in jail. During the arrests following the Hawthorne surplus store shootout in August of 71, police confiscated several sleeveless vests, outlaw biker style with the moniker Satan's Maidens stitched upon them. The Satan's Maidens, or Devil's Witches as they sometimes refer to themselves, were inspired by the family's time with the Straight Satans, an outlaw motorcycle club. With their hair shorn, sleeves ripped off, the tender young women of the Manson family, including Lynette Squeaky Frome and Sandra Good, plus Nancy Brenda Pittman and Maria Alonzo, looked like hell on wheels indeed. This is also around the time of the infamous Book of the Dead. In November 1971, Crystal and Country Sue Bartell were arrested at a Sunset Boulevard motel after soliciting 2 vice officers for paid sex. There have also been rumors about a pornographic raid that uncovered raw film footage of Alonzo in the early 70s from these confiscated films. By mid-1972, Crystal and another stripper, Priscilla Cooper, see earlier info from this video, were living with Nancy Pittman in Stockton, California, and each of the 3 women were dating members of the Aryan Brotherhood, the neo-Nazi prison gang. Alonzo's boyfriend was Billy Gusher, a 23-year-old career criminal covered in jailhouse tattoos. You learned earlier in this video about the crimes those men were involved with, including the murder of a married couple. And you can learn more about the murder of the Willettes by watching the first video in this series, What Became of the Manson Family. Maria's boyfriend, Billy Gusher, aka Iceman, agreed to testify against the other 2 killers, and he pled guilty. They then married in the spring of '73, quite possibly to avoid Alonzo testifying against her boyfriend. During Montfort and Craig's trial that June, Alonzo attempted to smuggle a switchblade into court and was arrested. While married to Gusher, who was serving time in Idaho, Maria then hooked up with another Aryan Brotherhood member named Robert Bernard Hedberg Jr. Hedberg, born 1936 in Los Angeles, so 15 years older than Alonzo, was another career criminal. Allegedly, Alonzo was loaned to Hedberg by Gusher, in thanks to the Aryan Nation for continuing to protect him in prison, even though he had snitched on 2 other members for murder. Using the name Bobby Forbes, Hedberg and his friend Garrett Brock Trapnell set up a baffling plot to kidnap a foreign dignitary and hijack a plane. Hedberg was in LA County Jail, awaiting sentencing for charges of unlawful flight and assaulting a police officer, and Trapnell, also at LA County, was facing a life sentence for hijacking a Los Angeles to New York jetliner 2 years before. So Maria gets roped into this scheme by Hedberg and Trapnell, who are both behind bars at LA County Jail. They want her to kidnap a foreign consul from Estonia, Paraguay, Uruguay, Canada, France, Germany, Switzerland, or Haiti, so that the dignitary can call in favors to have both men released, and then Trapnell and Hedberg would hijack another plane to fly them out of the country with whichever consul they managed to capture as their hostage until safely in a country that would not extradite them back to the U.S. Oh, and they also wanted $250,000 from whatever dignitary they managed to nab. Instead, Maria, using the name Karen Forbes, got arrested at her Los Angeles apartment. Investigators initially thought, because of her Manson family association, that the hijackings were part of the spree of crimes committed by the family in an effort to get Charlie out of prison. But by then, Crystal had moved on. She pled guilty to aiding and abetting an escapee, or intended escapees more like, and received 6 months in jail and 5 years probation. By the way, if you get the chance, please read the book The Fox is Crazy Too about Trapnell. His 1972 hijacking attempt resulted in being shot by an FBI agent posing as a flight crew member. He had demanded over $300,000 in ransom, asylum in Europe, and the release of 2 inmates, a prisoner in Dallas, Texas, and Angela Davis. Trapnell, who died in 1992, certainly lived a life that was stranger than fiction. Now, as if her life story wasn't wild enough, what happens next to Alonzo opens up another can of worms. You see, the Aryan Brotherhood, the white supremacist prison gang known for violence toward black and brown inmates, is not a racist organization. It is a business, one who uses race and racism, anti-Semitism, as part of its doctrine, but at its core, the Aryan Brotherhood exists to recruit members to the Aryan Nation, its parent company, although some believe the Aryan Nation is now defunct. Inmates loyal to the AB, once released, will repay the Aryan Nation in whatever way the nation deems appropriate. During the 1970s, American prisons became incubators for highly organized and racially segregated gangs that would come to dominate both inside and outside of the prison walls. Among the most notorious were the Aryan Brotherhood, AB, La M.A., the Mexican Mafia, and the Black Guerrilla Family, BGF. Despite their racially polarized identities, these gangs operated more like organized crime syndicates than ideologically driven hate groups, with money and power serving as the central motivators. Their quest for financial gain often led to complex and surprising alliances between them, blurring the lines of racial division in pursuit of profit. Founded in the late 1950s, LaMA initially formed as a brotherhood for Mexican-American inmates, but quickly evolved into one of the most violent and financially successful gangs. By controlling the drug trade and other criminal enterprises in the prisons, LaMA established dominance. They had little concern for racial purity when it came to making money, however, often working with non-Latino groups to increase their profits. In contrast to the AB and LaMA, the Black Guerrilla Family, BGF, founded in 1966, had roots in political activism. Formed by George Jackson in San Quentin, BGF saw itself as a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary organization with a strong anti-racist and anti-imperialist agenda. Jackson's original ideas formed a critical part of the early doctrine of the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA, who kidnapped heiress Patty Hearst in 1974. After the 1971 murder of Jackson at San Quentin, the gang, under new leadership, shifted its focus from ideological warfare to more typical organized crime activities such as drug smuggling and extortion. Despite their racial segregation, the AB, LaMA, and BGF shared one fundamental goal: to control criminal operations inside and outside prison. While each gang outwardly claimed to protect its racial identity, the economic realities of the drug trade, arms smuggling, and extortion demanded cooperation across racial lines. And that brings us back to Crystal Palace, true name Maria Teresa Alonzo, for after she served her time for the kidnapping and hijacking charges and was released, she was brokered by the Aryan Brotherhood to none other than Joe Pegleg Morgan of LaMA. Joe Morgan was actually a second-generation Croatian who became head of LaMA, the Mexican Mafia, while serving in prison in California, and Morgan had helped negotiate a truce with the AB and LaMA before his mid-70s release from prison. Joe Morgan became one of the most influential leaders of the Mexican Mafia in the 1970s, despite his non-Latino background. Born in Los Angeles in 1929, Morgan grew up in a gang-ridden neighborhood and quickly embraced a life of crime. After losing a leg in his teens, he earned the nickname Peg Leg, but his physical limitation did little to slow his ascent in the criminal underworld. And by the way, nobody called him that to his face. Fluent in Spanish and equipped with a sharp strategic mind, Morgan broke LaMA's strict ethnic rules, becoming one of its key figures and later its de facto leader. Under his leadership, the Mexican Mafia expanded its influence beyond prison walls, becoming a major player in California's drug trade and organized crime. Morgan was known for his intelligence, ruthlessness, and insistence on discipline within the organization. Here are two photographs of Maria and Joe, neither in particularly good condition. I also read some rather unsavory reports about Maria being used by Morgan to service his friends during their time together, and their relationship did not last long. By 1977, he had married another woman, Jody. Maria was actually still married at the time to Billy Gusher. She divorced him in 1979. In 1982, Maria married again and moved to the Pacific Northwest. She and her second husband had 4 children, born between 1983 and 1992, before divorcing. Her children, now adults, bear a striking resemblance to their fiery mama, and one of her sons is a noted rock musician. Alonzo now lives in California, and with her partner, advocates for the rights of disabled people. Perhaps that explains why, when I learned 2.5 years ago that the infamous Crystal Palace was still alive, I chose not to share it. She lives a good life today in service to others and has not been involved with criminal activity in nearly 50 years. Good on you, Maria, for finally claiming the life you deserve and finding your voice while using it to lift others who have felt discarded and disregarded. Before I end this video, there is one more later associate of the family that I wish to mention here. You will remember that in 2014, Charles Manson got engaged. His fiancée was Afton Burton, aka Star, an Illinois teen who traveled to Corcoran, California to meet her idol. She was permitted visits with Charlie, where the two fell in love over vending machine snack cakes, and Burton even announced that she and Manson had applied for a marriage license before the whole deal was suddenly off. Allegedly, Charlie had learned that young Star and a man named Craig Hammond were conspiring to gain access to Manson's corpse after death through his marriage to Star, and then the two would sell tickets to the public of his glass-encased mortal remains. During that era, Hammond also came under scrutiny by prison officials for apparently smuggling cell phones to Charlie, who used them to call up friends around the world and serenade them. Well, Craig Hammond, aka Grey Wolf, wasn't just some random guy who later befriended Manson in prison and snuck him cell phones while apparently also cozying up to his fiancée. Grey Wolf was actually there back in 1970, hanging out with the family after Charlie's arrest. Later, he visited Manson in prison, and they used to play chess together. But then they became estranged until Charlie's friend Michael Channels got them to bury the hatchet and return to their chess game. And by the way, Star Burton is now dating actor Vincent Gallo and possibly expecting a baby with him. Here are the two of them at a recent Trump rally. Thank you for watching this installment of What Became of the Manson Family. In our next edition, we are going to take a look at the lives of the final young women who joined the family before the October 1969 arrests in Death Valley. The last girls.